Darren Aronofsky's Noah. Don't worry guys, I'm not going to be doing movie reviews on this show all the time. But in this case, I thought it was kind of important. See, there's been a lot of debate among Christians over this film. One's on one side who think it's brilliant, and one's on the other who think it was downright sacrilegious. Well, I was rather curious to see it myself, especially when I was reading all of the reviews, and halfway through I just had to stop, because I didn't want it all ruined for me. So, I went to see this, and I had two major things to say about it. It will probably be interesting to Christians and hopefully secularists as well. Number one, this movie is not exactly a Christian movie, and I think that's obviously what all Christians had in mind, but this is why I say that. When a director goes to make a movie out of the Bible, he's faced with a few problems. The biggest problem is that the Bible is really told in epic format. Epic format basically means that the events are far more important than the motivations. In short, what's happening is more important than why. So, in other words, the great hero goes and fights the terrible monster and chops off his head and slays all the other monsters and goes back into the town, and there's much rejoicing. And there isn't a whole lot about exactly how we got from point A to point B to point C. So when you make a movie about it, there's different ways you have to go about connecting A to B to C and showing the motivations of the characters, because they have a tendency to be very two-dimensional. It's not because they really were two-dimensional, it's just that that's the way epic format is. That's just the way it was written, in these broad strokes. Now, it's very obvious that Aronofsky, who you may remember from the movie Pi, is big into Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. So it's not entirely surprising that this movie is really more Jewish. Because what he seems to have done is, in order to go from A to B to C, he's gotten into a lot of Jewish, shall we say, extra writing. See, a lot of Christians tend to think that Judaism just sort of stopped right after Jesus died. That was it. Boom, hit a wall. Nothing else happened. A lot of them aren't aware of the fact that not only do they have the Tanakh, which is what the Christians call the Old Testament, they also have the Talmud, which is their very rich oral tradition, and the Midrash. Now, the Midrash is really a big collection of sort of extra writings that connect A to B to C. They were a way of going back and sort of showing exactly why this happened and this happened and this happened, and you know, connecting the dots. Now, the problem with this is that, of course, the Jews, going in a different direction than the Christians, came up with a lot of different motivations for the A to B to C. So, obviously, things happen a little differently. Also, he's big into Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, and they have a lot of their own ideas about why things happen in the Bible and what was really occurring in the Bible. They sort of decode it in their own way. And so what you really have is a film which, frankly, basically tells the story that we find in the Old Testament, but told through a somewhat more Jewish, more mythic perspective. There's also a lot of the Book of Enoch in there, if anyone's familiar with the Book of Enoch. So if you were going into this movie thinking, I'm going to get your average Christian take on Noah, you might be a little disappointed. But if you keep the Jewish perspective in mind, it might make more sense to you. The second thing I'd like to talk about has more to do with the way we take in stories from the Bible. Most of us who were brought up in predominantly Christian cultures have heard these stories time and time again ever since we were, 2 years old, especially if we went to Sunday school. And the only problem with this is we were often told them by adults who were giving us somewhat simplistic, dumbed-down versions. Because after all, if they read them straight out of the Bible, they would have been pretty racy. There's a lot of things you probably don't want to tell kids about from those stories. For instance, there was a really big debate over the movie Noah, which kind of blew my mind I don't know why of all the things in that movie, this is what people jumped on. But there's a place at the end where Noah gets drunk and he winds up passed out on the beach. And people just got really, really upset over this. How could you take this great patriarch of the Bible and depict him as being drunk? Well, the only problem with this is it's in the Bible, guys. It's only 4 chapters in the Old Testament. Go read it. It'll only take you a few minutes. Noah gets drunk. He winds up passed out. Shem comes, sees his father naked, gets cursed above all men, and the other 2 boys come and they walk backwards, covering their father with a sheet. It's actually very accurately depicted in the movie. And all you have to do is actually read it. All I can figure is that either people were remembering these stories they'd heard since they were a little kid, which I'm sure people probably didn't tell them about that part, or they have read it and the stories are so strongly in their head that they just sort of skip over that. And believe me, it can happen. I remember when I was 11 or 12 and I had decided I was going to read the Bible from back to front. Now, I'd read most of it, a book here and a book there, but I hadn't really read the whole thing all the way through. So over the course of about a year, I read the Torah. I don't know how many times. That's the first 4 books of the Bible. The Christians call it the Pentateuch. And I always got bogged down, especially in Leviticus and Numbers. So I'd read Genesis, I don't know how many times. And this one time I was reading it, I finally came to the conclusion that this story was so strongly in my head that I wasn't really reading the words. Because while I was reading this part, and you all know the story very well, Eve wanders away from her husband. Adam is somewhere off in the garden. Eve wanders over to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, starts talking to the serpent. He deceives her into eating of the fruit, and she eats it, and she's horrified at what she's done, and so she takes it to Adam, and Adam's horrified, and he doesn't know what else to do, and so he eats some of the fruit so that he won't be without her, and they're cast out of the garden. And Eve is the cause of the fall of man. Well, the only problem is this isn't actually what happened, because this one time I was reading it and I got right to that verse where it says she took of the tree, ate the fruit, found that it was good, and gave also to her husband who was with her, and he did eat. Now that just blew me away. I mean, I knew that wasn't what had happened. I knew that she'd wandered away from Adam, so I went back in the chapter to find the part where she'd wandered away. It wasn't there. It hadn't happened. They just hadn't mentioned Adam in the rest of the chapter. The truth is, she was standing there at the tree with Adam, and she was talking to the serpent, and Adam, I don't know what he was doing, but he was just standing there, and he let her make the choice. She ate the fruit, he ate the fruit, they both did it together. It was a mutual thing. And my problem with this, and my problem when I was 11, was this idea that this had been used my entire life, and really the whole history of the church, as a way of kind of saying that women were these deceitful beings who had caused the fall of man. And I'm not saying that had exactly been told to me, but I know a lot of people had that attitude because of it. And it simply wasn't true. It wasn't even there. It's one thing to take a story and kind of skew it a little bit, but this wasn't what happened in the Bible. The whole story didn't happen. It never said that she wandered away from her husband. It never said that they were apart. And it even says that she hands the fruit right over to him. He's right there. And this is why it's very important to read the Bible yourself. And when you do read the Bible, try to take it from another point of view. Try to take it from a point of view of someone who hasn't read these stories 50,000 times already. And when you see a movie like Noah, try to keep in mind that it isn't all just done for dramatic effect or done because it's Hollywood. Read the book yourself. See what really happened before you judge it. Because sometimes you'll really be surprised. I'm the Urban Omnist, and this will probably be my only movie review. Though you never know. Maybe Aronofsky will do another one. Signing off.